This winter has seen a long line of irate passengers at Delhi airport. Annoyances are naturally very high because that long queues which people are facing seems to be a hark back to an older time when those queues used to happen. At another place, there's similar queue, except that it's not visible, for buying of motor cars. The popular brands of most of these cars now have a waiting time that's almost close to 2 years. Another sector, the MSMEs, are facing shortages of shipping lines. Their cargoes are piling up at the airports. Shortages seem to be everywhere. And obviously, in response to those shortages, we have the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman telling industry to build up capacity to address those shortages. That would seem about right. Except when you look at the shortages, you realize that they are telling industry something different. There's a pricing problem there which is not coming to the fore, and that is what we shall be addressing in this issue of On Point. The animal spirits of industry responds to the scent of price changes far better than tax cuts.
Haynes, in that book, used the term animal spirits to refer to what he thought was a driving force for the economy.
We have the right human capital, we have the scale, we just need to make the right investments.
That it is 100% economically viable because the land cost rate is very, very reasonably low. So this is the time that you can take the initiative to plan this development, and using your relationship with the investors, foreign investors and Indian investors, it can be a great boost for Indian economy.
The long queues at the airports are not going to go away soon. I mean, today they are at Delhi airport, but they could surface at some of the other metro airports very soon. So what is this unmet demand telling us? If we look at introductory economics, the basic rule there is supply and demand. How do they intersect with each other? And wherever they intersect, there is a particular price at which the intersection happens, a particular quantity is sold at that intersection. And that's intuitive. That doesn't need us to go over too many charts or graphs to understand. But in this thing, the clear role there is therefore of prices. If prices move, supply and demand tend to come to an equilibrium. How much do these prices move? There's another concept from introductory economics. That is the concept of elasticity. It says how much does a quantity respond, in this case to prices, is a measure of its elasticity. So, in this case, what is happening at the airports? As we can see that there is a supply constraint. We can see that there is unmet demand. But what is not moving? Whose prices are not moving? How much should that price move in terms of elasticity? These are the critical questions that need to be understood. And if they are not understood, then no amount of visits by the civil aviation minister will actually be sorting out this problem. Or, as we talked about, the problem for the MSMEs in another sector. Prices in the Indian economy have not been moving of late in the way that they should. I'm going to bring in another concept of economics, and this is the concept of complementary goods. What does complementary goods mean? That if the demand for a particular product is rising, then its complementary good will also, the demand for that will also rise. So, a very simple example is petrol and cars, which all textbooks talk about. If the price of petrol rises, the demand for cars will fall. In this case, we are seeing something different happening. The demand for cars have risen. So, that should mean what? Well, that should mean that the price of petrol is not adjusting. And is it so? Well, that is so. For the last 2 years, the price of petrol or diesel in the Indian economy has not moved. If it has not moved, then it becomes extremely difficult for a car manufacturer to be able to predict which way this demand will move. Now, this is a problem. You might think that looking at the long range of cars, the prices that they have, the demand for them in the showroom, looking at the waiting list, a car manufacturer should raise capacity. But it won't work out that way, because a car manufacturer is not told anything of substance by the prices at which the cars have been sold. She gets a much better understanding of how the demand for cars will pan out by the price of fuel. Look at this RBI paper. It was written in 2019, but it's a very powerful result which this paper obtains, where it says that the demand for automobiles responds to the price of fuel much more than any other factor like interest rates or even environmental factors. This is an example of complementarity. But as we said right now, the price of petrol and diesel, as you can see here, has not moved for the last 2 years. The same thing is happening in the airports. What's happening there? You are seeing a long line of passengers standing there. What is the supply that is supposed to take care of those passengers? More flights. But when will those more flights come? If the price of aviation turbine fuel does move in tandem with the demand of the passengers, because that contributes the most to the carrying cost, to the operational cost of an airline. Now, that is the problem, that the aviation turbine fuel price that is there in India is actually saddled with more than it should be saddling with. So, what's happening with the airline companies? The airline companies are saying, I don't want to raise my cost. What will I do? I'll instead carry more passengers on the same flight by packing them in more. Those queues essentially tell you that there are more passengers standing at the same time for a less number of flights, getting annoyed, irritated, and creating a huge Twitter war all around. As I said, this can't be solved by creating more gates, by having extra machines, or by the minister making more frequent visits to the airports. The problem is at the level of the price of the ATF, and that is something that needs to be solved, along with that of the price of petrol and diesel. If those prices move in tandem with the demand and the supply, we shall have a much better winter at this stage. What is the upshot of this year-ender price pe charcha all about? Well, there's a time when we all start thinking about why certain companies invest, why certain companies do not invest, why are some of these A companies investing in sectors like, I don't know, coal, oil, the works. Well, it turns out that the price signals there tend to be more accurate. For companies in other sectors, the price signals are not working out as smoothly. Now, don't get me wrong, I am not one of those guys who thinks that just like a stock exchange where prices, adjust immediately, things can happen similarly in a market. It doesn't. Industry, government, consumers, they all take time to react. So, there will be problems in the adjustment mechanisms. One adjustment mechanism, for instance, Take the example of Swiggy or Zomato. Now, what do these companies do? Supposing the evening is very nice, as it is now in December, what will happen? You and I will feel like ordering out something. And as more of us order, obviously Swiggy and Zomato will put in more riders to serve our orders. But after a point, even they on a particular evening will run out. In fact, chances are that as the evenings remain more and better, they will be able to serve and less percentage of their customers. The way that they can handle it is only by thinking about today's challenge a quarter ago or a year ago, by training people to become good riders, to be safe ones who can deliver the food at the residences, and to be able to have a knowledge of the map of the city. So, it means there is a time that it takes for companies to bring in people to be able to start delivering on the orders of the customers. But to do that, again the role of prices come in. It has to be clear to the companies that the prices will fluctuate, will change when needed, to be able for them to take the risks. This is something that political leaders often find extremely difficult to navigate through, which is why you find that when there is a shortage at the airport or other choke point at the airport, ministers are there. When you find there are other supply shortages coming along, the supply shocks, there are other regulators who are put in. For instance, when electricity is in short supply, regulators rush in. But most of the time, by letting prices signal shortages, and this is a very important point, by letting prices signal shortages, a very good social investment is done. And that social investment comes in very useful to push physical investment. The finance minister will be awesomely helped if she allowed more companies the freedom to determine their prices, and it applies to the entire government. If that is not done, then companies tend to be extremely conservative in deciding how much to expand, how much capacity they would take on even in their most dire circumstances. So, when you look at the data for bank loans to companies, what do you see? Well, what you see is, first of all, clearly there is a rise in the credit from banks to companies, and not just from banks. There are more companies also sourcing loans from abroad. Now, that's good. That's what it should be happening as the Indian economy is on the mend. But if you look at the data a bit more closely, you see that most of those loans are going for shoring up the working capital of these companies. In other words, the companies are taking out loans not to add to their investment, but to make their existing production process run better. So, the supply shortage, which we started out, is not leading to a signal for additional investments. And therefore, we have to look for something else that would make these investments come through, or better still, make the pricing signals more accurate. So, the takeaway this time is very simple. Investments happen when the prices work. Just take an example, the Delhi Metro. Even now, ridership on Delhi Metro has not yet reached the levels it was in 2019. It's now about, as the data shows, about 85%. Now, what's happening? The pricing signal vis-a-vis cars is not working, and the pricing signal vis-a-vis cars will not happen if the fuel prices at the bunks do not change. Now, these are complicated series of numbers or complicated series of elasticity questions, that how do they impinge on each other. When a finance minister wants to push investment in an economy, she would be helped if she also looked at which price leads to what sort of a signal. You don't often have to give tag set-offs. It is better and often works easier if you instead let the prices play among themselves, even with a lag, as in the case of Swiggy that we just saw. So that's all from this issue of On Point. Till the next time, thank you.